many other functions in Photoshop, such as what we see underneath the Layers panel here. Layers, duplicate layer, new fill layer, new adjustment layer, all these adjustment layers, layer mask, vector mask, smart objects. These are all things that can be controlled through the layer menu. But as you can see, it's a big menu and there's lots of subparts to it, and it can be time consuming to have to go and use all these things. You don't need it. I rarely, if ever, use the layer menu because if we go underneath window here, and I'm going to take you after these first three here, the application frame, option and tools, the very most important menu. In fact, the most important panel, not menu, but panel in Photoshop is this one right here. This is the layers panel. Notice it's so important, it gets its own keyboard shortcut built right in. F7, learn it, use it to always bring up the layers panel. And when I bring up the layers panel, oh, and notice this, that the properties panel came up right with it. I'm just going to move this off, and we'll come back to that in just a second. I'll show you how important that one is. It's the second most important panel in Photoshop. But I just want to focus on the layers panel right now. Everything that you have here underneath the layers menu, all right, you're going to have right here in the layers panel. Notice that you've got a menu up here. Every single panel has its own pop-up menu. When you click here, new layer, duplicate layer, new group, artboard, mask objects, convert to smart objects, all the things we saw over here, you're either underneath the menu or down at the bottom. Remember those adjustment layers I just showed you? Boom, all right here, creating masks right here. So you can access all those controls right through this floating layer panel. You don't have to be mousing around all the time. So the layers panel, the key panel inside of Photoshop. That's where we're going to add all of our elements, our type, our images. We're going to control layer stacking. This is really the core. This is the really the nexus of everything that we're going to create and edit inside of Photoshop, the layer menu. And you just don't need to go to the layer panel. You don't need to go to the layer menu to access almost all of those functions. Same thing applies to type. You know, there's a type menu in which you can control type, but there's also type panels, such as character panels. When you bring up the character panel, it actually is a double panel where character and paragraph control, right? Which is easier and faster than using the type menu, but I'm going to show you something even better than that, all right? I don't even use the panel. I use something else. More on that later. But the basic idea that I'm driving at here is if you can do it through a panel, use the panel. And almost, I would say 80 to 85% of the functions you're going to be using can be going right through the layers panel. All right, so let's just go right back and take a look at it. I'm just going to Command D to deselect the image. I just want to take a minute just to talk about the layers panel and what comes up here. When you open up a new image like we just did, this Alaska light image, it comes in with a background. So that's your first layer. So when you open up an image, like you're taking it off your digital camera, you're going to have a background layer. That's the starting layer, and then we're going to add other things to this. But before we do this, I want to add in and combine, group, our second most important menu, which I've already mentioned to you, right? And that's the properties panel. You'd never know it just by looking at this list, but this is super important. So I'm going to bring up the properties panel. You might remember when I brought up the layers panel initially, the properties panel was stuck on. Well, there's a reason for that, because I've grouped them together. All right? And as you're going to see, when you click on anything in the layers panel, all right, you're going to have control of whatever you click on inside the properties panel. So I always want my properties panel to be with my layers panel, and this is how you do it. This is how you group them. Take the properties panel and then move it up right next to the bottom, and then just snug it up a little bit, and you'll notice that little blue line occurs. Do you see that little blue line? All right. Ooh, as soon as that blue line occurs, release, and then whenever you move the layers panel, the properties panel goes right with it. And even if you close the layers panel, the properties panel closes. And when you bring the layers panel up, do you remember the keyboard shortcut? Yep, F7, remember that. All right, the properties panel will come right up with it. So I always group those two together, and these are always up on screen, almost regardless of what I'm doing in Photoshop, because everything goes through layers. And notice when I click on the background, the properties for that background layer comes up here. And notice there's lots of things you can control here, grids and guides. You can actually change the mode right here. Remember, I mentioned that typically we do that through the menu, but you can actually do it here. control canvas size. So whatever we click on, the control for that element is going to occur right here. We'll see that more as we go along. If you are a painter or you draw, you want your colors and your brushes together, you can do just what I've done here with layers and properties. When I do color correction, if you take my color correction class, you'll see that I have histograms and info panel always grouped together because I always use them together for evaluating and adjusting images. So as you develop your own Photoshop workflow and have your own favorite panels that you work in, give some thought to, oh, I like those two together all the time, and create your panel groups. All right, now that we've got a general introduction to the interface of Photoshop, menus, panels, tools, controlling options for the tools, and we know we're going to be focusing on layers. Anything we can do through panels, we're going to do it through there. Now I'd like to do is a little project to kind of show you how all this works together and also teach you some tools, particularly some non-destructive editing tools. Let's make our first composite image in Photoshop in this next part. And I want to show you one of the functions that I always use. Say if I open this image, this is going to be the image that I want to use. One of the first things that I do is I go my command or control and I go minus minus, and I make this image small right up here. I put it in the upper left-hand corner. All right. And I mentioned earlier non-destructive image editing. Always focus, whenever possible, do things non-destructive. And one of the things that I do, I've always done this from the beginning, is I never work on the original image. So here's the Alaska Light. Notice how I've named it Alaska Light-Original. I'm going to create a working file. All right, and to do that, I'm going to go Image. Remember my keyboard shortcut I told you I made? Duplicate, F10 that I created myself. And then here we go. And we're just going to create this and a new file. And we're going to call this Working. All right, and I'm going to click OK. All right, and we're going to create a working file. And that leaves by duplicating, rather than doing a save as, see, it creates a new image and brings it up on screen. That's the advantage of duplicate. Leaves the original image on screen. Why do I do that? Well, one, I make it smaller so I can keep an eye on it. And then I love to use this original image as, one, a protected image, and two, as a CNC, as a compare and contrast. So as I work on this image, I can always visually compare it back to the original image. So it's very handy. It's just something I do with every single image. And if for some reason I screw up and I damage this image over here, my working image, I can always go back to my original. So it's both a safety and a compare and contrast capability that this gives me. While we're here, since we've created this image, understand this image is just created in RAM, right? It's not actually saved to the hard drive. So let's go ahead and save this new image while we're here. I'm going to go ahead and click Save. Remember, Save As creates a new image, but it closes the one that's on screen. I'm just going to click Save, which is going to save this image that we have just created. In this dialog box, if you're not used to the new versions of Creative Cloud applications, they're always trying to send you to the cloud, saving things to the cloud, which is not a bad thing. But if you just take a look here, you go click Save, boom, it's going to save it to the cloud, the iCloud. And then all your images end up off of your computer. If that's what you want, fine. I don't like that. I like to work off of my computer and save things to the cloud as I want to use them. So you need to be aware of this dialog box. Lots of people think that they're saving it to the computer when they're actually saving it to the cloud. See, save to Creative Cloud. That's on the internet. So my suggestion is be very clear as to where you're saving your files, and see on your computer, it's the secondary choice here, all right? Because Adobe wants you to work on their cloud. Well, I don't want to work on their cloud. I want to work on my computer. So I'm saving all my files. And a lot of my files are big. I work with multi-gigabyte files sometimes, and I don't need to be working on those over the internet, all right? So just be aware of that. I'm going to put it on my computer rather than saving it to the Creative Cloud. I'm going to click on the computer. And then a word about file formats here is that, notice this original image is a JPEG. I can't do anything about that. So first, I recommend to you strongly, if you're a photographer, you're working in Photoshop and you want the highest possible images, capture your images in RAW. And then we're going to save your raw files out as working .psd files. If you capture this as JPEGs, as this image has been, it's automatically been compressed and the image quality is somewhat reduced depending upon what kind of JPEG you created. Well, in this case, it's a starting JPEG. I can't do anything about it, but what I can do is arrest any further image degradation. So I'm going to save this as a .psd file, right? A .photoshop file. Notice the .psd. This is a native Photoshop file function. And there's no compression here, and it gives you full functionality and faster working inside of Photoshop. So we're going to save this file out. The original one's a JPEG. Again, can't do anything about that, but I'm going to save this out as a .psd file. So don't just merely click save and save it again as a JPEG. Slow it down long enough so you have a .psd file. And by the way, this function here is part of my workflow. Anytime I see a dash or underscore working, I know that's a working Photoshop file, and it's one that I can and should be editing. Versus a file that's called dash original, then I know that's an original file that I may open it, but I'm immediately going to do a duplicate and save it out as a Photoshop file. So there we go. So we've duplicated our image. We have a working CNC version, and we have a working Photoshop file. It's no longer going to lose any image quality. And then as we move through our editing functions, we're going to preserve as much image quality as possible. All right, so we're going to make our first composite image. We're going to add something to Photoshop. Let's start by adding a type layer to Photoshop. All right. And to do that, we just come down here and select the type tool. And remember, when you click and hold, you can see there's multiple type tools. We're just going to start off with the basic one. Remember, you can just press the T key, because remember our preferences, we turned off the need to hold down the Shift key. So we can just press T, it activates the type tool. And then whatever your foreground color is, that's the color that your type will start out as. Totally editable at any point. But you could set your foreground color first, as I've done here. I've set it as white. And then that's going to be the color, the initial color of your type. So just select the type tool, select whatever color you want, and you can change the color by just clicking on it, and then you can change assign a different color here if you want to. And then click anywhere in your image. Typically you want to click somewhere close to where you'd like the type to be. So I always like to use negative space when I place my type. I try to avoid setting type on top of complex image areas, because then both the visibility of the underlying image and the readability of the type suffer. So I've chosen an image with some nice negative space, and I'm just going to click, and then watch what happens over in the layers panel when I click. Boom, automatically a type layer is created. And then you have something called Greeking. This is called Greek type. It just puts in some regular type just as a placeholder for you. All right, and then you can start typing. All right, so we're going to type Alaska Light, all right? And notice it creates a type line and then sets type along that line. And when you get done typing what you want, and you can decide you want all caps, upper and lowercase. I'm a big fan of upper and lowercase characters on words because it enhances readability. When you get it the way you like it, then just hit the Enter key. A lot of functions when you assign them, like type or scaling or rotating, transforming, when you get done with it, you hit the Enter key and then it applies it. And notice that now we have a type layer. And I mentioned that everything goes through, everything we add comes into the type layer. So you think of this type layer as being a third dimension. All right, we're looking in 2 dimensions here, but this Alaska Light is on a layer that's not above the background layer. This is called layer stacking. All right, so think of this in 3 dimensions. All right, length and width, and then this is the height. All right, that we're adding images, or in this case, type onto our image. All right, once you place your type, you can edit that type, you can move the type, and the easy way to move the type is there's this move tool right here. You can click on that and then come up here and click and move it. Just make sure that you're on the type layer. You select the type layer, you can move it around. All right, but you can also, I can stay in my type layer. I can be in whatever tool that I want to be. All right, could be in a marquee tool. If I hold down my command key, so long as I'm not actually, editing the type, and it automatically brings up the move tool. All right, hold down the command key, control key on Windows, and it automatically allows you to move any element around that you want. Just again, make sure that you've activated the type layer that's added. All right, and then you can move it around. All right. So that's kind of a nice, handy keyboard shortcut to know, is being able to just hold down the command or control key and click and drag. All right. To move any element around that you have on the particular layer. All right. The other keyboard shortcut that you'll want to learn is space and then command or space and control. That allows you to bring up your magnifying glass, and you can click and drag. and you can zoom in and out while you click and drag like this. That's a really handy function. And the other one is that once you zoom in like this, if you just hold down the space bar, then it becomes a page grabber hand. All right? So space bar is the page grabber hand, and space and the Command or Windows key allows you to zoom in and out. All right? So and you might want to just stop for a few minutes, stop the video, and just kind of practice that for navigating around. And I'll give you one more thing to kind of play with, and that is underneath the view menu, where you can zoom in and out, the Command plus and minus, Control plus and minus, really handy. And there's also the fit on screen and 100%. These are Command 0 and Command 1. And 0, think of 0 as the whole screen, and then 1 is at 100%. Really worthwhile just kind of playing with these. So Command 0 will take me to full screen, which goes outside of my video screen. I'm going to go Command minus. All right, or Control minus to bring my image back inside. So just play with one of those a little bit. Command plus, minus, minus. Remember in our preferences, we set the window to zoom with the image. Now it's paying off those big benefits that we talked about. So this is a really easy way to navigate through the Photoshop interface using some of these keyboard shortcuts. All right, so stop, take a few minutes to use some of these, Command and Control, move your elements around, Command, Control, plus and minus, or Command spacebar command to zoom in and out, or just the spacebar to bring up the page grabber hand. All of these are tools that you can select down here, like there's the hand tool, and then there's the selection tool. But it's just a faster and easier way to navigate through Photoshop. Okay, so once we have our type layer, then we can double click to select this. And we can control the type. Now notice there's multiple ways to control our type. Here, remember, since we're in the type tool, we have our choice of, we can control our fonts here, we can control our font styles here, we can control our point size, we can control the amount of anti-alias, right? We can also use the character panels, all right, and paragraph panels to get the same kind of control. But honestly, I don't use either one of those. Why? Because I don't need to. You don't either. Because notice, since we have selected and we have grouped our properties panel with our layers panel, as soon as we click on type, look at this. All the type controls are right here. All the paragraph controls, all the type options are available here. Everything that is in any of these panels, the options panel or in the type panels, are right here underneath the properties panel. And so no need to go to all those other ones. And just having the properties panels keeps your workspace clean and clear. You don't have those extra panels. Don't have to move all the way up here. That's why I mentioned earlier, you've got multiple ways you can do things. But here, the best way is just using the properties panel. So whatever we click on, and again, remember, whatever you click on, the controls for that automatically come up underneath properties. So when I pick up my click on my background layer, I end up with background layer controls. When I click on my type layer, I end up with all my type controls. So this is really how you want to control things. So if I double click on here, select my type, and I can come down here and I can say, oh, I'd like that. Let me try that at 30. And then I hit my enter key and go, oh, that's too big, right? And then notice that if I come down here, I can just, choose, say, 25, all right? I don't even have to select the type. I can just control it right through there and control the font size. There we go. Nice. All right. And then just hit the enter key when you're done and good to go. Hold down my control key. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of place my type where I want it. I'm going to place a little bit asymmetrically. I don't like type right in the middle of my image. I like asymmetrical design because I'd like to put my elements a little bit off center because it creates a little bit more dynamic composition. It helps move the eye around the image, creates a sense of more 3 dimensions, making your design more 3-dimensional, more active. Okay, what else can we do with type? Let me just show you a couple of things that we can do here. One is we can come and we can double click to the right on the right side of the type layer, and it brings up layer styles. And a layer style is, there's all sorts of different layer styles in here. Bevel and emboss, contour, stroke, inner shadow, inner glow, satin. Boy, can you have fun. Word of caution here, it's easy to overdo layer styles. And layer styles work on images as well as type. Let me just show you one simple one, how this works. I'm going to choose a drop shadow. And notice that all these dialog boxes have previews. So you'll turn on the preview or off, and it'll show you actually, what the preview of that drop shadow is going to be. So that's very handy. And then if you click on Here we just activated. Here, when you click on drop shadow, then you get controls over that whole shadow, what the blending mode is, what the angle. So notice as I change the angle, and watch up on the image, right? It changes the angle at which that drop shadow is created. And you can control distance, spreading, size, quality. You can control the color of it. You control the blending mode and the opacity, all right, of your drop shadow. So full control. Spend some time. You might want to stop here, stop the video, and kind of play with some of these layer styles. I'm just going to add a simple drop shadow here. But I want to remind you, you can really overdo it. And particularly on drop shadows, don't have them big and bold. And drop shadow should be kind of almost secondary in terms of visual. It shouldn't be grabbing a lot of attention. So anyway, so we're going to add a drop shadow here. And notice that all of this is non-destructive editing. All right, I can edit my type at any time by using my properties panel, and you can turn the visibility of the type layer off and on by clicking here. Anytime I want to change this drop shadow, I can just double click on it and it brings up the drop shadow. I can add or subtract any functions that I want. Completely non-destructive editing. All right. Two other things to kind of talk about here when you have a layer, in this case we'll use type, is there are blending modes and opacity. Again, all of this is controlled through the Layers panel. I think I mentioned you can control these things other places, but why? Why do it, right? So here, underneath blending modes, again, we have a whole array of different blending modes, and you can select them, and they'll, as you go through them, they'll give you previews of what's happening, of what they will do when you actually apply them. So color dodge, linear dodge. Some of them have no impact because of the nature of the compositional element. But overlay, soft light, hard light. I like the soft light, because this is kind of a subtle image. It's got a subtle look and feel to it. So rather than just having that big bold type, I'm going to go with soft light. All right. So I'm going to click soft light, and notice how it blends that type in with the background, and the background starts to show through a little bit. But I'm thinking, I'd like to maybe get the background coming through a little bit more. That's where I can go up here and choose opacity. All right, so I'm going to come here and I can drag this, and maybe I'll just go maybe 95, 85, something like that. Somewhere in the 85 to 90. There, I like that. And again, at any point I can say, I want to pump that up a little bit. Take it up to 89 or 90%. All of it's completely non-destructive editing. Nothing is applied to this file until I flatten the image and save it out as something else like a JPEG, but never, ever flatten the only Photoshop file that you have here. And when I say flatten, I'm talking about this function here, where you choose flatten or merge layers, merge visible. Always work on a copy of this Photoshop file. Keep the original Photoshop file as is. All right, so we've added a type layer, we've edited it, we added layer effects, we did blending modes, and we controlled opacity. All key functions, and notice, all done through the Layers panel and or its buddy, the Properties panel.